So it's that turmoil, both in our own country and internationally, that's brought about, I suppose, what's happened in the last 2 years. I hear that you have a great interest to hear something about our president, President Zuma, who's, who I'll talk a bit about, because what happened, Myrtle has her own views about President Zuma, and you've no doubt heard about that. And that's the wonders of our country. People are entitled to their views and they can say it, and that is as it should be. So that's, I think that's an indictment to our democracy. But I want to touch on just a few points on how President Zuma fits into the economic architecture and the political architecture more than, I think, the value judgments that people for themselves must make about his leadership style and his actions and so on. Because people have a right to say that, and they should be afforded that right. But when the ANC didn't deliver to poorer communities as it should have, there was a huge amount of dissent within the ANC and within the country. There was growing levels of protest around housing, education, economic rights, a variety of issues. And the country was becoming unstable around this. This is 13, 14 years into a democracy. It's early days for countries to experience that kind of instability. But I suppose it was good because we didn't go as far down the road as Zimbabwe did, where there was a major crisis when some of the leaders had acted in ways other than which the country deserved and their people deserved. So the centralization of power in the ANC, the centralization of power in the presidency of the country under the administration of Thabo Mbeki had really silenced the voices, had undermined the democratic ethos of our country, and had imposed a set of values and a set of economic orientations that our country had not embraced as their own. Now, we're not suggesting for a moment we must act as if there's not a global economic reality. We've got to confront the realities of capitalism. But you don't do that oblivious to the needs of your country. You find the balance between the two, as I see many other countries today are insisting on finding. Because we've got to find a new architecture that makes sure that we respond to people's needs more effectively and more urgently. And so all of that dissent manifested itself in a deep unhappiness within the presidency of the country and of the ANC. And President Thabo Mbeki, who had built this wall of patronage around him and had really done all of the big economic deals that made these black millionaires, was under a lot of pressure from ordinary people. But the ranks of the ANC was really swelled with people who were either councillors or mayors, but everybody who was in the leadership of the ANC had benefited in some way from the transition. If you get a job in government, the perks and the salaries and stuff that goes along with that lifts you out of the conditions in which the community you represent live in. So that tension developed in the ANC, and that manifested itself in a battle between Thabo Mbeki on the one side and really those who had benefited from the transition, and Jacob Zuma on the other side with people who were desperately unhappy with the circumstances. There were a lot of other factors that also came to bear on the two of them, but essentially, in a crude way, that was what the battle was around, and it was about making sure we change the way the ANC operates and the way the ANC operates with the unions and its other alliance partners, and on the other side of it was the way in which government would continue to drive a program, sometimes dismissive of the needs and the ambitions of regular people. President Mbeki wanted to also run for a third term, and his people had advised him that he would win at Polokwane, which was the big conference of the ANC. But there was a resounding victory for Jacob Zuma. So he's the overwhelming favorite in the ANC, and he then became the president of the ANC, and subsequent to that, the president of the country. But the point that I want to make is that battle was a political battle that was influenced by economic interest and whose interests were represented by the different factions within the ANC. That's also how I think we were subject to many of the global pressures and many of the powerful vested interests in our country, because we didn't transform economic relations in our society. The mines that were stolen in the days of apartheid still belong to the thieves who stole it back then, and they were just giving legitimacy to it by taking black partners onto it. But that's played itself out. And so today, the majority of people in our country, the overwhelming majority in terms of the election results, support the presidency of Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma has had an incredible tough time in the media in respect of many of the allegations that have made at him. In my defense, let me say this, that I think I had, as last year, November, I was interviewed by one of the local newspapers, the Mail and Guardian. It's an international newspaper, and they asked me about my preference for the president. And my preference was always Kgalema Motlanthe, who's the deputy president now. I say that because I hope that it will influence you to understand that I'm not a Zuma hack. I'm not just going to say things in defense of him. But I want to say this much about him, that he's been able to unite our country, that he is an incredible leader in respect of his ability to listen to people and to find ways in which to engage. Now, there's all kinds of allegations against him. There's the allegation about the arms deal and his corruption, and there was a long, drawn-out battle around that, and the jury's out on that in many respects. But the one thing that the court did say is that his chances of a fair trial has been undone by the history. 7 years ago, the Director of National Prosecuting Authority said that he was guilty of corruption, but the chances of this case succeeding in court would be impossible. And it's in part related to the statements. That person subsequently being found to be very firmly entrenched in the Mbeki camp, led to his dismissal as the deputy president, and in them going to court to answer those questions. So there was all kinds of technicalities, but the impressions in the paper was that he is a corrupt president. Now, he may be corrupt. I'm not suggesting that he's not corrupt. All I'm saying is that surely the rule of law that should apply to any citizen should also apply to him. And that is that he should have his day in court one day to explain himself. And so that should happen. The other big case against him that's driven many people away from him is that he had an affair or sexual relations. And I'm choosing a word that I've seen in the Americas. I think Bill Clinton used that word in respect of your own issues. So these things are not unheard of in the country, but he had this relationship with this young woman, and then there were allegations that it was rape. There was charges laid against him. He went to court. The court found that he was not raped. All kinds of issues that played itself out in the court. But that continues to be held against him, partly because the woman was HIV positive and people felt that the president, especially the president who's the leader of the moral regeneration move in the country, should be more circumspect in his conduct. I agree with that entirely. I think he has apologized, but I think we as a society have the right to expect our leaders to behave in the way we'd like to see our society develop. So I have no problem with people feeling unhappy with him about that. I think that's right. But I do think it should be cleared up that he hasn't been found guilty of rape, but he has, I think he's made a serious moral breach, and he should look within himself on that. My own approach towards it is a much more pragmatic one, because in the battle in the ANC, there were many different groupings. There was only one person strong enough who could challenge Mbeki, and that was Jacob Zuma. There's nobody else who had the history of, had the support of a cross-section of the different groups in the society. And Jacob Zuma, when he won the battle against Mbeki, could have said, "Now I'm going to deal with all of those who was in his camp and just kick them out of government," caused a whole lot of stability. But he's shown himself to be the kind of leader who's included even people from those other sides. And I'm attracted to that, because I think whatever his failings and his mistakes may have been in the past, and there certainly has been some, he to me demonstrates the question of leadership that puts our people and our country first, because he hasn't indulged himself. But he is our president now, and so I hope that our entire country can come behind him and that we can support him to make sure that he knows there can't be that level of unaccountability again, that we expect of him to behave in the way that we deserve. We expect another Mandela. People should expect no less. You should expect no less than Obama. We should all be more critical across the globe to demand that.